Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second show today. This is the dojo.live episode. Today is Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. I'm Tulio Siragusa, broadcasting from Southern California, joined by Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico, and Carlos Ponce in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Hey, guys, welcome back.
It's good to be here as ever, Tulio.
Today's guest is David Dulany, founder and CEO of Tenbound. Welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
We're talking about everybody's favorite topic, sales. What does the future of sales look like for SaaS companies? That's the topic today. And we're going to dig in a little bit more about what's working, what's not working, what does the future look like. So before we do that, let's get to know our guest a little bit and a little bit about his company. If you could please introduce yourself, David, to the audience. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to dive in on this. So I was running sales development teams at tech companies for about 7 years, and then started Tenbound as a research and advisory firm to help companies that were looking for information and content and really community around getting better at the job. And so, most SaaS companies have a sales development program, either starting up or in the mature phase. And so we primarily work with those companies to help them improve performance and do the job better.
Very good. Thanks for the introduction. So let's go right into it. Let's dig into the topic today. Carlos, please kick it off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tulio. Well, you already touched on that a little bit, Tulio. We're going to be answering a question today. The question is, what is driving the function of how sales development teams drive sales pipeline at most high growth SaaS companies? So the topic is, as chosen by our guest today, is precisely the future of sales for software as a service companies. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, David, is why did you choose this particular topic, and why did you feel it was relevant for today's day and age? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sales development as a department really is relatively new if you look at the profession. And as I mentioned, most SaaS companies have a sales development function at their company. There's a huge number of people involved. There's a huge number of tools involved. There's a huge number of different processes depending on, who they're calling on. And there's a lot of moving parts from an industry perspective. And so first and foremost, for me, it's one of the most interesting topics out there that didn't really, up to forming Tenbound, there wasn't sort of an industry center that was really focused on the problem. And so we've kind of morphed into that over the years of really being the go-to place for getting good information on it and content, events, etc., to push it forward. It gets me out of bed every day because it's a fascinating subject, and there's a lot of people working on it. And it started in earnest. I mean, there's always been a B2B sales function that's just in charge of cold calling and following up on inbound leads. But really, it was the advent of the success of Salesforce.com and the SaaS model, and a book called Predictable Revenue that came out about 10 years ago that kind of shot the function to the forefront.
Yeah. That's Aaron. Yeah, Predictable Revenue. It does ring a bell. Actually, we at some point we took some training with Aaron Ross. Aaron Ross, right? So yep. Thanks for elaborating on that. So David, so there's a number of questions that I have that I'm sure Kim and Tulio might have too, but I'd like to ask you as my second question. Before we went live, we were having this prep conversation, and we were mentioning how depending on what your personality trait is, your personal likes and dislikes, that's the path you might end up choosing in sales development, right? So would you say that if you consider like this universe of traits, of personality traits amongst all the sales development representatives in the world, would you say that it's safe to say that there's one particular path is better than the other, or is it just one size fits all, or all of them are good? So how can we make sure that we're going to be selecting the right path in sales development that fits us as individuals? Where do we go?
Yeah, it's interesting because we primarily almost 100% work with SaaS companies, and so if you think about a software life cycle, there's all the stuff that goes into marketing it, getting in front of the right people, talking to people, landing the subscription, and then handing that off and making sure that everybody's happy and they never quit the subscription. It's in that continuity of the subscription model where this fits in. And so when you think about sales development, it's trying to connect the dots between marketing and sales to make sure that we can get those subscriptions signed by the AE and then be able to hand them over to the customer success team to make sure that they never cancel. And it really creates an amazing spectrum of opportunities for people that want to get into the sales industry and in the SaaS industry, because as you pointed out, there's all different personality types that could be adding value to the company based on where they are in that subscription process. So I'll give you an example: pure outbound, cold calling. This is something that, if your personality is sort of a bookworm and a shy type of person and you don't like talking to people, that's probably not the best job for you, right? But, once they've signed up for the subscription, then we need a lot of customer success managers and people to take care of them. And so you could try the SDR position for a couple of years and then potentially get promoted to become a customer success manager, for example, that's more aligned with your personality. So,
all right. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Okay, I got a lot more, but Kim, Tulio, please, do you?
Yeah, I got a couple. So, David, you talk about SDRs. Has the model changed for SaaS companies? It used to be you had SDRs who either worked with marketing or part of sales. It's a question of where they end up, right? Every organization has a different take on it. And they did most of the lead gen development and then handed it over to an AE to go close the deal. Is that changing now because of the pandemic? Everything is done online. Has that delineation changed for SaaS companies? Can you maybe enlighten a little bit what's the direction and where it's coming from, the before and after of what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to give you a consultant answer, but it really depends on the company and where they are in the life cycle and what type of product they're selling as far as the subscription. So for some companies, that traditional model works really well, and for other companies, they're moving to more of like we used to do it in the old days, right? Where one person would be the sales rep across the continuum from cold calling, following up on inbound leads, closing deals, and taking care of the customer. Some companies are using that model successfully. But at the end of the day, the sales development position, a lot of times it's stuff that the sales reps don't want to do, to be honest. And they aren't really excited to get up and do cold calling and follow up on inbound leads a bunch of times. They'd rather be closing deals. And so I think that the initial premise with sales development still holds, in that there's got to be somebody doing the job, on a daily basis, being well managed and well supplied and well trained. Otherwise, it's just going to be put off to the point where nobody's doing it, and you're losing opportunities.
Why is the role of an SDR particularly relevant in SaaS? My understanding is just how fast, in part because of how fast moving the software as a service is and constantly changing. Like, but why is it particularly relevant in this particular vertical or industry, would you say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you think about a subscription business model, there's the lifetime contract value. And so the first few years of SaaS, everybody was trying to figure out how do we do the accounting, because they would be pouring a ton of money at the beginning of the sales cycle and the SDRs and the outbound, process and the marketing. And that wouldn't pay back until they had the client as a subscription for 2 or 3 years. And if you look at sort of the growth trajectory of like salesforce.com, they have a installed base that took quite a few years to grow at the beginning. And then they kept building on the install base, building until now, the new business revenue becomes a smaller slice at the top of the chart, but it's the installed base that's paying, ridiculous dividends, every month. And so, to your question, the SDR model works really well because we've got to get people to sign up for the subscriptions, and the companies pour an inordinate amount on marketing to get in front of people and then chase down all the leads that come in and make sure that we can get an install base going, so then that they can start to ratchet back on sales development once they have that nice trajectory.
Right. And how can the sales development be relevant or unique in such a large vertical with quite a bit of competition? Like, going back to what you mentioned earlier in today's show, predictable revenue, it's my understanding that that technique worked really, really well. And then everybody started doing it. And now it kind of doesn't work so well anymore. So what's next? I mean, we don't want everybody to do it. Just tell me, don't listen to this part show. No, I'm kidding. But like, what's next?
Yeah.
What has to change? Or how can the sales model stay fresh?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And literally, I would be down in Mexico sitting on a beach right now, drinking a cold beverage if I knew. I wish I could tell you. What I can give you a framework to think about it, though, in that in the future, there's only going to be 2 jobs. There's going to be people that are below the API and above the API. And so if you think about that delineation, below the API is anything that a computer can do, anything repetitious, anything augmented, intelligence, anything that's that can be offloaded to a computer. You don't want to be in that zone. Where you can add value really is above the API in bringing your humanity and your feelings and your creativity into the outbound, sales process. And that's the value that you add in this whole thing that's completely unique and that makes you stand up above the pack and get a better response rate to your messaging. And so, just one little trick of that is video is something that's very underutilized in the sales development world. And, there's a lot of vendors out there that help facilitate that, but bringing your personality and something unique to the conversation through video, is something that not a lot of your competitors are using right now. And it gives you that human edge.
I can totally relate to that human edge. I'm sorry, Carlos, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, specifically regarding to the human part that you just mentioned, how do you feel specifically, even in the SaaS world, how do you feel about offline marketing, offline sales development, or offline approaches that might not necessarily be digital? Let me give you an example. Then this is just a thought that I had at some point. I had this thought of we're reaching out to software companies that we want to target. For example, I thought of just grabbing maybe a post-it note or a note or an envelope and just do something postal and just put a stamp on it and send it over with a personalized note. You don't get any more offline than that. But I do know that is going to be reaching the hands of someone, a human being that might be a decision maker in the software world, right? So how do you feel about, and I went very extreme, I know, but how do you feel about this approach with this vision of going offline a little bit and just combine it with digital tools and just bring that part into the tech world? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on in that you have to look at sales development, the messaging and putting out different creative devices as running experiments. It's constant experimentation. And so if you think about like a scientific process, you come up with a hypothesis, you do the research, you do a bunch of experiments, you test the hypothesis against the results of the experiment, and then you make course corrections. And I mean, one of the, everybody hates to hear about it, but the secret of sales development, okay, I'm going to tell everybody, okay? The secret of sales development is great project management. And it's really one of the most boring topics on earth, and nobody wants to hear it. But you have to be an amazing project manager to be successful in sales development, because it's that constant hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, and iteration on your campaigns. It's not just send mail. Or, go ahead.
And discipline, right? I mean, like 70% of salespeople who fail, it's just they didn't follow up, no follow up. I mean, the opportunity is there, and just the organizational skills don't match the desire sometimes. So I'm listening to what you're saying. One size doesn't fit all, right? Obviously, and a lot of companies have shaped their sales model based on the founder's sales, right? They maybe were really good at closing, or were really good at initiating a new deal, so they built around themselves. If they're good closers, they built some people who can generate leads. If they were good people that know how to network and generate opportunities, but not very good at closing, they hired closers. But eventually, as the company grows and expands, then you try to have some formal process that is replicable, because that's not necessarily scalable to build it around an individual. And you hire leaders, but those leaders bring in their playbooks, right? After so many years, you've developed playbooks. But what I'm hearing is you still have to adapt it to the environment you're in. And in SaaS companies, it's a little different, because you're not selling a one-time ticket item that has a renewal a year from now. It is an ongoing subscription. Maybe it is a renewal every year, but maybe it's monthly, depending on the service offering you have. So what's the key things that you recommend to those companies that have either gone from founder sale, build around themselves, and now are trying to scale? What's some of the things you advise them on to get to that scalable model? Because it's painful. It's painful for a lot of founders to shift into that playbook, right? They're used to doing it a certain way. So what's working so far in terms of having those conversations?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we hear a lot that an executive will come in from like Salesforce, for example, or Oracle, and they'll try to implement the playbook that's worked for them, for the last 20 years. But to your point, you have to look at every problem as a completely new market. You've got a new ideal customer profile. You've got a new persona. There's new, conferences that they go to. There's new podcasts that they listen to. Everything is specific to that industry. So just overlaying a repeatable playbook that you used at Salesforce, 10 years ago, it's better than nothing, but you're not going to just be able to sprinkle that magic dust and and drive a bunch of appointments, a pipeline. So I think that there has to be some kind of playbook in place, and we even recommend, even if they're just starting an SDR department, and just start your SDR playbook, get all the tribal knowledge and everything out of the head of the founder, get some scripts, get some initial hypothesis into the playbook, and then start road testing it. Take it out and run campaigns. We recommend like a 90-day cadence constantly on outbound campaigns, and start to road test the playbook that you have and see if it's valuable. If it's not, then you got to keep experimenting because it's not working.
Yeah. With your experience, what you just said, the 90-day playbook, or excuse me, the 90-day cadence, where has that sort of research come? Like, how did you land on the 90 days?
Yeah, so we run EOS, which is it's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and so a lot of the cadence that we recommend comes from EOS, and it's essentially the theory behind it, and in practice, because EOS is used by a lot of companies, is that the human mind can really focus in depth on something for about 80 days before you just start to kind of lose the audience. And then you've got about a week to recalibrate, analyze, and reset for another 90 days. It just works really well. I mean,
nice.
With our clients and with our company. Yeah.
What do those cadences, I got two questions. Like, what does that cadence usually look like in your experience? Let's say like number of touches, how it's kind of switching up, and where would the video component that you spoke to earlier sort of fall in? Do you recommend that like early on, sort of as a last ditch effort, somewhere in the middle? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we recommend sprinkling it throughout, but where it can be really helpful is after you've made initial contact and you're trying to make sure that they stay in the sales process until there's some pipeline generated, because you've already made initial contact, and so they're a little bit more comfortable, opening up the email from you and watching the video. But it can be used right up front in every message, if you want to. The only thing is that some spam filters and different, things like corporate firewalls and stuff have a problem with putting videos into emails, especially. And so, if you're already whitelisted with the company and you're trying to move them along, you have a better chance of actually getting the video watched. And then as far as
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Or something like LinkedIn, perhaps.
Yeah, LinkedIn all day. I mean, people are really, I'm just harping on this because I've seen it work. And like I said, people get emails all day. There's got to be something different. And you could do it on LinkedIn. You can do it on all the other social networks. You can embed them into your email, and it just humanizes you.
So David, go ahead, Carlos. I'm sorry, you got a question.
Just one little thing. I'm curious. Something that I'm curious about. We're discussing the future of sales for SaaS companies. So, to me, selling starts with a connection with one touch when you make a genuine connection. So, towards the end goal of making that genuine connection, how do you feel specifically about automation on LinkedIn? How do you feel about that? Or LinkedIn automation, let's call it.
I mean, I've been I think that, so there's a couple of use cases. One is what we call the connect and pitch, thing, where you connect and then you immediately come back and pitch. I think, based on what I'm hearing and just the reaction from the buyer community, is that's a big no-no. I mean, because it's just sort of almost like an abuse of LinkedIn and the way that it's intended to be.
It's the fastest way to get unconnected.
Right. Yeah, and get blocked, to be honest. It's essentially spam. The one caveat on that where LinkedIn might have some value is if it's a event or something very relevant to the buyer that you're just informing them of, and you're not asking for 15 minutes and asking for a meeting and stuff like that. You're just informing them about something that's going on. That if it's very targeted and relevant to them, then I think that could be appropriate, but the pitch and switch or whatever is just a nightmare.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Okay,
what should
back
the
to you,
pitch look
Tulio.
like in something like LinkedIn so that it's not a switch? You just recommend being very upfront right away with your connect request?
Yeah, I mean, so just taking a
Wait.
step. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, wait a few
Yeah,
weeks, maybe even a month before you make it so obvious. Or in some cases, I've waited as long as 6 months to a year before following up with a connection. I mean, that's just my own opinion. It's like, wait, don't jump on it like the next day, or give it a little
big
space,
time.
right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would just, if anyone's listening, I would recommend go out and get the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. I mean, that book essentially gives you a roadmap to how to communicate with folks and how to get them to move from being busy and harried to actually sit down and sit down and talk to you, at least, which is what we're trying to do in sales development. And one of the things that's in that book is building a trust connection over time. And to your point, imagine if you were walking into a bar. I mean, we used to go to bars, to date people or whatever. This is before like Tinder and all that. But you walk into a bar and you just walk up to the first person that you think is attractive and ask them to marry you. Like, I mean,
Right.
essentially the equivalent of what we're doing on LinkedIn right now. So you've got to set up an attractive profile. You got to get in shape. You got to get a better car and all these things. Have some game. Talk a little bit. It's so.
Yeah, what's happening is like you approach them and you say, "Hey, I'm Carlos. Want to have a couple of kids with me?"
Right.
It's like,
I mean, sales is like
it
dating.
doesn't
right?
it doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't work that way.
It is. It's exactly.
Although there are some who swear that they just do the probability, they use the science enough where they eventually get a yes, but that doesn't work very well for most. So
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and taking the analogy, some people they have an attractive brand. They're calling from a well-known company. Their LinkedIn profile looks amazing. Their website looks great. The prospect has heard of them. It's a much warmer introduction than Billy Bob from Zippo.com or whatever. They just like, who the hell is this person? I don't know who they are. They're just become noise.
Yeah. So we've talked a great deal about the science, right? The cadence, the approach, the frequency. What about the art? The building of the relationship. What's sort of in store with one of the things you guys do to help SDRs with those skill sets? What are your thoughts there? I know we're coming up on time. Actually, we're up on time, but I'm curious to hear about the art of it, how it gets infused into your offering.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so what we tell, managers and, people working with and training SDRs is, okay, they need to know how to use the tools and they need to understand the product on a basic level. But what they really need to focus on is the industry that they're calling on and the top, 2 or 3 personas within that industry that they're going to be calling on. That right there is like a whole year of study to understand who are the top players in the industry, who are the top players within those companies that we're calling on? And then within those top players, what are their top 3 pain points that they're dealing with right now? Like, what do they complain about? What are their problems? What do they hate about their job? And just really go deep in understanding those problems, because that's going to inform all of the creativity that you do in your messaging. You want to talk about problems, and try to, make it clear that you understand those problems. You have stuff that might potentially help them, and that's why you want to talk.
Well, we could continue talking for hours on this topic, but we're up on time. It's been great to have you as our guest, David. So much to take into consideration. But one thing that's clear is there's not one size fits all. You've got to develop something specific to your market, in many cases around the people that are involved, and don't be afraid to test till you figure out the approach that works. And once you figure that out, you're going to have to reinvent it at some point or another. So never sit idle. That's the word of advice.
No,
never sit idle.
With a cold drink in our hands?
Exactly.
Right.
No, that doesn't happen. Sorry, wrong profession. So thanks for being with us. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second. Carlos, we got one more show tomorrow, right? What do we got?
That is correct. That is correct, Julio. We got Itai Sedan, the CEO of Duda, DUDA. That is a low-code web design platform for enterprises and companies. So that's what we have tomorrow right here on the Dojo Live at 12 p.m. Pacific, as usual. So folks, stay tuned for tomorrow at 12 p.m. And remember, stay safe. And thank you. Thank you, all of you. And thanks, David.